both the Raven Union and for Lord Hardwood, who was pretty well respected. With Salt now in charge for the time being, he calls a meeting with Aziz to discuss peace talks. He needs some backup, so he has Alfie come with him. Alfie's forced to leave his mom at home, and he's worried that Gully is going to come after him, so he has Dave Boy watch by her side and make sure that nobody breaks in and does anything to her. Aziz is more than happy to talk about peace, and as a sign of good faith, he's going to allow Lord Hardwood's funeral party to enter the city and be buried in his family crypt. After that, they'll talk about peace. The Queen will be in attendance, as will most other high-ranking officials from the League. Most people in the League are thrilled that Lord Hardwood is dead, but Thomas Wayne doesn't think that's really a good thing. The thing is, the League doesn't really know enough about Salt to have a judgment on him. But after Aziz talked to both Salt and the Colonel for the army together, he thinks that there's tension there. Aziz also doesn't think that they're going to use Stormcloud. He looked at Hardwood as crazy, but Salt as a normal-minded individual. So the League is feeling pretty good. After the post-meeting meeting, Alfie heads home to find a drunk Dave Boy, and he's pissed. He calls him irresponsible, and Dave Boy shoots back, "Oh, I'm irresponsible." He then starts pointing out all of the things that led them to this point, and it's really Alfie who's the irresponsible one. Even Alfie has to concede this fact. Alfie's mom comes downstairs, and she agrees with Dave Boy. She tells Alfie, if your father was alive right now, he'd be rolling over in his grave thinking about you committing adultery. So now I have to deal with that, and I have to deal with terror bombs. And Alfie gets pretty pissed off at Dave Boy for telling his mother about Stormcloud, but Mrs. Pennyworth shoots back, "It's called honesty, Alfie." That's when Alfie tells her about the peace talks and the fact that the war should be over pretty soon. There's nothing to worry about. He then tells his mom that he will sort this out with Gully. The thing is, he has to go find him. This whole time he's been waiting for him to show up, but he can't keep living like this. Alfie figures the next day he'll go searching for Gully, and he's going to do it alone. He's very adamant to Dave Boy that he is not to be followed. He has to do this by himself. As Alfie heads to bed, not too far away, Thomas Wayne heads to Martha's place to have some adult fun. And it's pretty ironic when Thomas brings up the fact that he always has a condom on him because, well, he clearly didn't use it the first time they had sex. And that's a pretty good lead-in for Martha to tell Thomas that she's expecting. So the good news is he doesn't have to use that condom in his wallet. But, the bad news is he's going to be a father. I guess it's bad news however way you look at it. But for Thomas, he's surprised, but then he suggests that the two get married, do this thing right. And Martha doesn't really have any interest in getting married to him. They start getting in a little bit of a fight about whether they have to get married or not, and it leads to Martha just leaving her own apartment. The next day is Lord Hardwood's funeral, and as most of London watches on the television, Alfie heads to go find Gully. Gully's not hard to find. He's literally at home, although his home has been trashed, completely torn apart, and there's just Gully sitting in a chair watching the funeral go down. Gully asks Alfie, "Why are you here?" And Alfie tells him, "I owe you a fair crack." And Gully starts chuckling because he realizes that Alfie thinks he can take him, and he finds that hilarious. What he finds even more hilarious is that Alfie walked into an ambush. Out of the back room and the kitchen come two people from Gully's crew with guns pointed at Alfie. This isn't going to go at all as Alfie expected. Gully and his second-in-command, Monty, take Alfie to the forest, while the woman in Gully's crew just stays back at his place. They tie Alfie up, and Gully tells Alfie he has to even the odds. He stabs Alfie, telling him that Melanie stabbed him, so now they're even though Gully has healed up from his wounds. Monty then hands Alfie a knife, and Alfie can't believe that it's really come to this. He really just thought he could come in there and get his ass kicked, but clearly it's not going to go down like that. At gunpoint, Gully tells Alfie, "I'm going to give you a 5-minute head start. Run." So Alfie does. He takes off running in the forest, but that wound is really, really bad. Eventually, he just has to keel over next to a tree and wait for Gully to show up. And it takes a little bit longer than expected, but eventually Gully arrives. They have a talk about the whole Melanie situation, and then it gets down to hand-to-hand combat. Even with the bad stab wound, Alfie's holding his own. But with all that time that Alfie had to wait for Gully, he rigged up a trap. And when he backs up far enough, a tree ends up flinging around and stabbing Gully in the side. And Gully starts laughing. He finds it completely ironic because he's the one who taught Alfie how to rig this thing up. And even more ironically, he ended up killing the guy who taught him. But Alfie's not going to kill him. Even though Gully is badly injured, he's not going to finish him off. He tells Gully that he actually appreciates him, and he starts trying to stumble his way out to the woods. But luckily for Alfie, once his mom found out that he went to go after Gully alone, she lost it on Dave Boy, demanding that they go find him. So just like Alfie, the first place that Dave Boy looked was Gully's home, and that's where he found the woman from Gully's crew. Both Dave Boy and Mrs. Pennyworth beat her up and got the location out of her, and when they get to Alfie, he's in rough shape. Well, the first thing that Alfie says to Dave Boy is, Gully's in the woods and he needs an ambulance. Dave Boy and his mom then help Alfie up and they escort him into the car. So it was a really busy day for Alfie, but it was also a busy day for England. As I said earlier, Lord Hardwood's funeral was broadcast on television. There weren't many people in attendance. 2 people that were in attendance, though, were the Sykes sisters. And they noticed that there's some blonde they've never seen before who is making eyes at John Salt. The Sykes sisters are still out for revenge, so they file that away. But Salt gets up there and gives an impassioned speech to England, doing so in Hardwood's name, but it's all about doing your duty and staying the course. No doubt that the Queen and Aziz are probably regretting their leniency on letting Hardwood's funeral party through the city. After the funeral, the Sykes sisters follow this blonde to a playhouse. It turns out she's an actress. And the actress, who's named Vicky, tries to be a prima donna with the Sykes sisters, but learns pretty quickly it doesn't go that well when you try to do that. They're able to find out that Vicky is John Salt's girlfriend, and that is just the revenge that they needed. They escort Vicky back to their sex shop, and they're planning on killing her and sending her head back in a box to Salt. But when Katie finds out about this, she puts a stop to it. Katie tells Bet, "You promised me, no more violence." And Bet tells her, "I did, but, this is different. Lord Hardwood was my friend, and he was good to me, and I'm not going to betray him. This is rightful revenge." But Katie doesn't agree with that at all. Katie's not defending Salt, she just figures there's other ways to punish him. Seems like Bet really isn't agreeing with this line of thinking, so Katie tells her, "If you hurt this woman, I'm going to leave you." It changes Bet's mind. The problem is they can't exactly let Vicky go, so they tie her up and put her in the storefront, just like they did with the rapist. But now they're going to have to figure out what to do about Salt. Now, just as agreed upon, after the funeral, Salt was busy with the, quote, peace talks. But when he arrives at the Queen's castle, he's turned off by the fact that they have a summary of some of their positions, like where to break up territories and whatnot. He tells them that he feels like this is a list of demands, and they have no leverage in this. He says to Aziz, this is not a negotiation, this is peace talks. And when Aziz doesn't see the difference, he tells him that negotiations are when both parties have something to trade. Peace talks are when one side has their foot on the other side's throat. Now that Salt knows that the League has seen how Stormcloud works, he's using it to his advantage. So he's demanding that they surrender London. He gives them 48 hours to think it over. Both Aziz and the Queen can't believe the General will sanction Stormcloud to be unleashed on its people, but the way he looks at it, just as many people will die if they have to fight their way into London. At least this speeds it up. It puts the League in a really tough spot. And when you're facing certain death, you want to do it with, somebody. So the Queen and Aziz end up hooking up. Little bit of a fall from grace from the Queen because she went from Alfie to Aziz. But there's one last thing that Salt has to do. He has to get the vote of approval from the union's board. He goes and he meets with everybody and he makes his pitch that he feels like he's done the job and he's ready to step into Hardwood's shoes. And luckily for Salt, everybody agrees. But the last board member to agree is Mr. Pennyworth, who is basically a robot at this point, cemented to a wheelchair, but still very much alive. Thank you so much for checking out this recap. Please consider subscribing to the channel and subscribing to my Patreon. Hit thumbs up if you liked it. Smash that thumbs down button if you thought it sucked. If you left a comment, I don't get back to you. I usually don't check the comments unless they're like a super comment. Also, if you don't see the next video up on the end screen, not to worry, it'll be up in a day or two.